Alien Marines stunned as a Deathworlder fights on despite fatal injury. The battle was supposed to be over. For the alien Marines of the Dren Alliance, it was a straightforward mission: pacify the Deathworlder colony on planet HFY 7, a brutal backwater known for its harsh climate and resilient inhabitants. They had been trained to believe that Deathworlders, while tough, were still bound by the same basic limitations that governed all life forms, and that meant when one of them sustained a fatal injury, the fight was over. But today, they would learn differently. The invasion begins. The sky over HFY 7 was a dark, swirling mass of storm clouds, and rain fell in heavy sheets across the landscape. It was cold enough to turn rain into sleet, and the wind howled like a wild beast unleashed. The Dren Marines had landed under the cover of night, their sleek transport ships cutting through the storm like silent predators. Their orders were clear: infiltrate, neutralize, and secure the human colony. The Dren were an elite fighting force, renowned throughout the galaxy for their precision and cold efficiency, standing over 7 feet tall, with armored exoskeletons and 4 muscular arms. They were a species bred for combat. Their technology was advanced, their tactics flawless, and their weapons could cut through most organic material like butter. They had never faced defeat, not once. As the Marines disembarked and spread out through the muddy terrain, their leader, Commander Thr Ashen, watched the colony in the distance. The human settlement was nestled between 2 jagged mountain ridges, a strategic location that offered both protection and isolation. It was quiet now, save for the wind and rain, but Thr Ashen knew that the humans inside were preparing for them. They always did. Prepare for engagement, Thr Ashen hissed into his calm, his mandibles clicking with anticipation. This will be over before dawn. The Marines moved in perfect unison, their cloaking fields activated to blend seamlessly into the environment. They advanced quickly, closing the distance between the landing site and the colony perimeter. Their advanced scanners had already detected the human lifeforms, mostly unarmed civilians, but a few armed combatants as well. Resistance would be minimal. But as they drew nearer, something caught Thr Ashen's attention. A single figure stood at the colony's gates, unmoving, unafraid. The figure was a Deathworlder human. Even from this distance, Thr Ashen could see the distinctive build: tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in simple combat armor. A single rifle was slung over his back, and in his hands, he held a large 2-handed axe, an archaic weapon by any standard. But somehow, in the hands of a Deathworlder, it seemed deadly. Commander, one of his subordinates, Lt. KRK, said over the comms, "Should we take the shot? The human is exposed." Thr Ashen paused, his eyes narrowed as he studied the human. Something about the way the Deathworlder stood there, defiant and calm in the face of an overwhelming enemy force, gave him pause. There was no fear in the human's posture, only grim determination. It was unsettling. "No," Thr Ashen replied slowly. "Let's see what this one does." The first strike. The human, whose name was Captain Ethan Reyes, knew the odds were against him. The Dren had been terrorizing colonies along the frontier for months now, and HFY 7 was next on their list. There had been no time to evacuate, no time to call for reinforcements. The colony was his responsibility, and he would not abandon it. Ethan stood at the gates, his breath forming clouds of mist in the freezing air, the rain soaking his hair and dripping from the edge of his helmet. He could feel the weight of the axe in his hands, and the familiar hum of his pulse rifle strapped to his back. Both were old weapons, relics of another time, but they had served him well through countless skirmishes. Through the rain and darkness, he spotted movement. The Dren Marines were coming. He had heard stories of them, stories of their strength, their ruthlessness, their advanced technology, but there was one thing they didn't understand. They didn't understand what it meant to be human. They didn't understand what it meant to be a Deathworlder, raised on a planet where every day was a struggle for survival. Ethan clenched his jaw and gripped the axe tighter. They would learn. Without warning, a burst of plasma fire erupted from the tree line as the Dren opened fire. Ethan moved with the speed and precision of a seasoned soldier, dodging to the side as the plasma bolt struck the ground where he had just stood. He raised his pulse rifle and fired back, the rapid staccato of shots lighting up the night as they tore through the air. One of the Dren Marines fell, a hole blown clean through its chest, but they kept coming, relentless, unstoppable. They moved in a wide arc, trying to surround him, their cloaking fields flickering in the darkness. Ethan didn't wait, he charged. With a battle cry that echoed through the storm, He swung the massive axe in a wide arc, cleaving through the first Marine that dared to come too close. The blade bit deep into its armored exoskeleton, cutting through with a sickening crunch. The Marine dropped, twitching, as its black blood mixed with the mud. The others hesitated, just for a moment, but it was enough. Ethan spun, dodging another volley of plasma fire, and threw himself into the fray. He moved like a force of nature, his axe a blur of motion, his rifle firing with deadly accuracy between each strike. The Dren Marines were fast, but Ethan was faster. He danced between them, using their size and bulk against them, taking them down one by one. But the numbers were too great. For every Marine that fell, 2 more took its place. Plasma fire scorched the air around him, and even Ethan's reflexes couldn't keep up forever. He felt it before he saw it, the searing pain in his side as a plasma bolt tore through his armor, burning deep into his flesh. Ethan stumbled, blood pouring from the wound, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. With a roar of defiance, he drove his axe into the ground and pulled his rifle free, unloading a full magazine into the nearest Dren soldier. The alien dropped, but another shot hit Ethan square in the chest, knocking him to the ground. It should have been over. The unthinkable. Commander Thr Ashen watched the scene unfold with growing disbelief. The Deathworlder should have fallen by now, any other species would have. But the human kept fighting. He had seen the plasma bolt strike the Deathworlder's chest, seen the way it had burned through the armor and seared the flesh beneath. By all rights, the human should have been dead. And yet, as Thr Ashen watched, the Deathworlder staggered to his feet. Ethan's breath came in ragged gasps, his vision blurred by pain, but he forced himself to stand. His axe was still embedded in the ground, but he couldn't feel his arm well enough to pull it free. His body was failing him, blood soaking through his armor, but his mind, the thing that had always set humans apart, was sharp. One more. He just had to take down one more. The Dren Marines hesitated, clearly unnerved by what they were seeing. Thr Ashen's voice barked orders over the comms, urging them to attack, but there was a moment of uncertainty. In that moment, Ethan charged again. He was slower now, his movements sluggish, but there was still power in his strikes. He grabbed the nearest Marine and drove a knee into its midsection, sending it crashing to the ground. His pulse rifle was out of ammo, so he fought with his bare hands, using every ounce of strength he had left. Another shot hit him, this time in the shoulder, and Ethan grunted in pain. He was on his knees now, his vision swimming, but he refused to fall. He had made a promise to himself, to his colony, to his daughter back home, that he would protect them, no matter the cost. And that promise kept him alive. The will of a Deathworlder. Ethan's vision wavered as his body screamed for mercy, but he wouldn't give in. The pain from his wounds felt distant, almost surreal, as though his mind had detached itself from the carnage that surrounded him. He forced himself to focus, his breaths coming in shallow gasps, his mind laser-focused on the fight before him. Around him, the Dren Marines were regrouping, shaken by what they had witnessed. Their prey, a single Deathworlder, should have been dead twice over by now. They had fought against countless species, conquered planets, and crushed rebellions, but never had they encountered an enemy like this. Humans were supposed to be tough, yes, but this? This was impossible. The remaining Marines began to close in, their weapons trained on Ethan's bruised and bleeding form. The wind howled around them, the storm intensifying, as if the planet itself were bearing witness to the grim spectacle unfolding on its surface. Through the haze of pain, Ethan felt a surge of clarity. His pulse rifle was empty, his axe buried deep in the mud, and his body was failing him, but none of that mattered. He was a Deathworlder, he was human, and humans didn't quit. With a guttural growl, he reached into his belt and pulled out a combat knife, short, crude, but deadly in the right hands. He staggered to his feet, his legs trembling beneath him, but his eyes were locked on the advancing Marines. "Come on then," Ethan growled, his voice hoarse but steady. "Let's finish this." The Dren hesitated, their commanders barking orders over the comms, urging them to close the gap and end it, but something held them back. Fear, perhaps. It was a foreign sensation to them, one they had rarely encountered on the battlefield, but it was undeniable. They could see it in the human's eyes. He wasn't going to stop, not until they were all dead, or he was, and even then, they weren't sure which would come first. LT, KRK, second in command of the Dren squad, made the first move. He darted forward, faster than a human eye could track, his plasma blade swinging in a deadly arc. But Ethan was ready. With reflexes honed by years of combat, he sidestepped the attack and drove his knife into the alien's side, finding a gap in the exoskeleton. KRK let out a high-pitched shriek as the blade plunged into his flesh, and Ethan twisted the knife with brutal precision. The Marine collapsed, convulsing on the ground, and Ethan ripped the blade free, blood dripping from its edge. The remaining Marines froze, their confidence shaken. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of the storm and the heavy breathing of the dying lieutenant. And then, in a move that defied all logic, Ethan raised his knife in a challenge. "Who's next?" he snarled, blood leaking from the corner of his mouth. The unbreakable spirit. Commander Thr Ashen watched the spectacle unfold from the safety of his command post, his mandibles twitching in frustration. This was not how the battle was supposed to go. The Deathworlder should have been neutralized within minutes, but here he was, still standing, still fighting, despite the wounds that should have killed him 10 times over. He couldn't comprehend it. The Dren were the most fearsome warriors in the galaxy. Their technology, their physical prowess, it was unmatched. And yet, this lone human was defying everything they knew about warfare, about survival. "Commander," a voice crackled over the calm, "should we engage with heavy artillery?" Thr Ashen hesitated. Bringing in heavy weapons was a risk. There were civilians in the colony, and their objective was to subdue, not annihilate. But as he watched Ethan continue to fight, cutting down another Marine with that crude, primitive knife, he realized that they had underestimated the humans in a way that could cost them the mission. "No," Thr Ashen growled, "we will not resort to such measures. Send in the shock troops, overwhelm him." The order was given, and within moments, a squad of elite shock troopers descended from their dropships, landing just outside the battlefield. These troopers were specially trained for close-quarters combat, equipped with personal shields and energy-based weapons that could incapacitate without killing. They approached Ethan cautiously, their shields raised, forming a tight perimeter around him. They knew better than to underestimate him now. He had earned their respect, in a way that few enemies ever had, but that didn't mean they would show him mercy. Ethan's grip tightened on his knife as he saw the new arrivals. His body was at its limit, his muscles burned, his vision was growing dim, and his legs threatened to give out beneath him, but he couldn't stop, not yet. With a roar of defiance, he lunged at the nearest trooper, driving his knife toward the exposed joint in its armor. But this time, his enemy was ready. The trooper's shield flared to life, deflecting the blow and sending Ethan stumbling backward. Before he could recover, another trooper moved in, striking him across the back with the blunt end of an energy staff. The impact sent him crashing to the ground, the breath knocked from his lungs. For a moment, Ethan lay there, gasping for air, his vision blurring as the rain pounded down around him. His body screamed for rest, for release. It would be so easy to just let go, to let the darkness take him. But then he thought of his colony, of the people he had sworn to protect, of his daughter, waiting for him back home. No, he couldn't stop, not now, not ever. With a groan of effort, Ethan pushed himself to his knees, then to his feet. His legs trembled beneath him, his body swaying like a tree in the wind. But he stood, and he raised his knife once more. The shock troopers closed in, their weapons at the ready, but Ethan's resolve never wavered. He would fight until his last breath. And in that moment, as the Dren Marines watched in stunned silence, they understood what it truly meant to be a Deathworlder. The impossible victory. It should have been over. By all rights, the human should have fallen. But as Ethan stood there, bloodied and broken but unbowed, something changed in the air. It wasn't just the storm, or the tension of the battle, it was something deeper, something primal. The Dren Marines, who had never known fear, felt it creeping into their hearts. For the first time in their long history of conquest, they faced an enemy they couldn't fully comprehend, an enemy who refused to die, who fought not for glory or power, but for something far more dangerous: love, loyalty, and an unbreakable will. Commander Thr Ashen, watching from afar, realized that his forces were at a tipping point. If they couldn't defeat this one human, it would send shockwaves through their ranks. The legend of the Deathworlders would grow, and their reputation as invincible conquerors would be tarnished. "Withdraw," Thr Ashen ordered through gritted teeth. "We will not lose more troops to this madness." The Marines hesitated, clearly shocked by the order, but they obeyed. One by one, the Dren began to retreat, their ships lifting off into the stormy sky. The shock troopers held their ground for a moment longer, as if unsure of what they had just witnessed, before they too turned and withdrew. Ethan stood alone, the battlefield eerily quiet around him. His body screamed in protest, and he could feel consciousness slipping away. But he had won. Against all odds, he had won. With the last of his strength, Ethan knelt and retrieved his axe from the mud. He planted it in the ground beside him, using it to keep himself upright as he watched the enemy ships disappear into the clouds. And then, at last, he let himself fall. The legend of Hivara 7. Word of the battle on Hivara 7 spread like wildfire across the galaxy. The story of the Deathworlder who had fought on despite fatal injuries became a legend, a tale told in hushed tones by soldiers and civilians alike. To the humans, it was a testament to their resilience, their strength, and their unbreakable spirit. To the Dren, it was a haunting reminder that there were forces in the galaxy they didn't fully understand, forces that couldn't be conquered by brute strength alone. Ethan Reyes recovered slowly, his body healing from wounds that should have killed him. The colony he had fought so hard to protect stood strong, thanks to his efforts, and though he would never seek fame or recognition for what he had done, his name became known throughout the stars. He was a Deathworlder, a human, and that meant something more than anyone had ever realized. And so, the legend of Ethan Reyes, the Deathworlder who defied the odds and fought against an alien force despite a mortal injury, lived on. His actions on Hivara 7 became a symbol of humanity's indomitable spirit, a reminder to all who heard the tale that humans were more than just resilient, they were relentless. Across the stars, warriors from different species whispered his name, and the Dren Marines, once proud conquerors, spoke of him with both respect and fear. For Ethan, there were no parades, no medals, just the quiet satisfaction that he had done his duty. He had defended his home, his people, and the values he held dear, proving that the strength of a Deathworlder wasn't just in their physical endurance, but in the fire of their spirit. As Ethan lay in recovery, far from the battlefield, he could finally rest knowing that his daughter, his colony, and humanity had a future, one where their place among the stars was cemented not through conquest, but through their unyielding will to survive and protect. Hivara 7 would never be the same, but neither would the galaxy. From that day on, wherever there were threats to humanity, whispers of the Deathworlder spirit would echo, reminding all who dared challenge them that humanity was not to be underestimated. And for Ethan, his fight was far from over. He had survived, but his journey was only just beginning. The end.